Hello, this is Chris, and welcome to my second episode on the Southern Bourbon and Whiskey Talk channel. Today I wanted to address some terminology that is in the whiskey bourbon community that you'll see and hear the makers of bourbon out there use. A lot of them can be misleading sometimes as well. So the key and my goal from the beginning, like I said in my first episode, was to educate the everyday bourbon drinker like myself. And just, a lot of these terms I wish I would have known about from the very beginning. So, I just want to pass along the information to you. And today, while we go through this, I'm going to be sipping on a bottle I just found and pretty proud of it. It's a very hard bottle to find, especially here in the area I live in, Weller Special Reserve. Not that I was looking for it so much, but was in my local liquor store here and saw that they had it for a really good price. And so I decided to get a few bottles of it actually to have. And so I'm going to have a few sips of it while we go through the video and even do a little review on it for those that are interested in what Weller Special Reserve is. So cheers to everyone and good health. It's a really good, smooth drinking bourbon. But we'll talk about that at the end. So, some basic terminology to get familiar with. First off is charring, and what does charring mean in the bourbon whiskey industry? So basically it's a process that the distillers use to char the inside of their American white oak barrels. And charring is what really adds the flavor to bourbon. And a lot of people think that corn adds flavor, and it really doesn't add a lot because, and I'll talk about it in a minute, by law, bourbon is required to be a minimum of 51% corn. But it's actually the char of the American white oak barrel that adds a lot of the flavor. And the more flavor you get, the longer you leave the bourbon in the charred barrel, the more flavor it can gain. It can also get to a point to where, in my opinion, when it gets really over the 10 and 12 year point of leaving a good bourbon in the barrel, it doesn't necessarily do good things to the flavor all the time and everything. So, but essentially there's 4 different char levels out there that the distillers use, char level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And basically those are time that they actually char the barrels. So they range from 15 seconds all the way up to 55 seconds. And like I said, this is where your flavors come in. And a lot of times when you're getting taste of vanilla, caramel, toffee, and some other things, that's where it's coming from, is the charring. Okay? So another one is the mash bill. You'll hear this term. What is the mash bill on this bourbon? And basically all a mash bill is, it's a recipe, a grain recipe that's used to make the clear liquor before it actually goes through the aging process. And like I said earlier, all bourbons by law have to be at least 51% corn. And the corn don't add a lot of flavor. It can have some sweetness to it and everything. You'll find a lot of times your higher percentage of corn, when you get like over 65-70%, they are sweeter bourbons and everything, but not a whole lot of vanillas and all that come out of the corn. So, and then there's, in the mash bills, other than the 51% corn, they have flavoring grains added. And usually most bourbons will have 3 different grains in their mash bills. And I'll give you a good example of a few bourbons that I like. For example, Four Roses Single Barrel. It's known as a high rye bourbon, and it contains 60% corn, 35% rye, and 5% barley. So and then the flavoring grain is usually one of the 3 grains that's in the mash bill. In this case, rye is the flavoring grain. So if you get this bourbon, with the 60% corn, it's going to be sweet, but it's also going to be blended with that rye spice and everything. So that's why I like Four Roses, specifically single barrel. It's a very diverse bourbon, if you would. So a good example of a wheated bourbon, Weller is a wheated bourbon, but one of my favorites is Maker's 101, and you'll hear me talk a lot about Maker's 101 and some of the Maker's products. So basically, Maker's, the mash bill is 70% corn, 16% wheat, and 14% barley. So there's no rye in the mash bill to add a pepper spice. So the wheat is the flavored flavoring, if you would. Maker's 101 for me is just a good, sweet, well blended bourbon to enjoy. So that is an example of a mash bill there. So that kind of gives you an idea of mash bills. Now, I'll tell you, a lot of people, especially new bourbon drinkers, tend to shy away, and they're scared of rye bourbons or high rye bourbons. They're like, oh, it's bitter, it's too spicy or whatever. Rye can be an acquired taste for sure, but I do enjoy a good rye that's not overly peppery, if you would. Okay, so kind of leading from the mash bills, the characteristics of a lot of the grains and where some of the other flavors other than the oak barrel comes from. Malted barley adds some smoke and chocolate cocoa flavors, if you would. So, and usually barley or malted barley is a lower grain in that mash bill. So you'll see anywhere from 5 to 15% usually malted barley. Rye, like I said, it's peppery. Like star anise, if you've ever had a dish with star anise, it can add that flavor to a bourbon. And bacon spices, so that's what can come out, and mint, so that's what can come out from a rye. Wheat, wheated bourbons, they're kind of a lot of times a light honey, bacon spices, even fruit. You'll get like citrus a lot of times from a wheat. And I'm going to talk a lot about that when I do a quick review on the Weller Special Reserve. Corn, I've already hit corn. It doesn't add a lot of flavoring. It does add some sweetness, and also I get flavors sometimes in different bourbons, like buttered popcorn, buttered toffee, whatever you want to call it. So your higher corn mash bills can do that. So, but just keep in mind that a lot of the really good flavoring comes from that char and everything. So speaking of the char barrels, what are the bourbon barrels as far as the wood? What are they comprised of? for the most part, they're comprised 99% American white oak is the wood of choice for aging bourbon here in this country and everything. So now some other terms to get away from char and mash bills. You'll hear about blending a lot of times, blended whiskeys, blended bourbon. And they are very new age now. They're really in, and there's a lot of distillers and bourbon companies making a lot of blended bourbons, blended whiskeys. So basically what blending is, and blending's been around forever, so blending is just the artful science, if you would, of taking different whiskeys to create a cohesive whole, really good bourbon. So some basic examples of blending that's been around forever is all bourbons other than single barrel, actually, your single barrel bourbons are blended. So like small batches, they'll take anywhere from a few to a few hundred barrels, blend them together and everything. And the fewer barrels that's involved, actually the more barrels that's involved in the small batch, the more consistent the distiller can be in the flavoring that comes out and the product. So the fewer barrels, the less consistent, because especially with single barrels, what you can find is if you buy one bottle of, say, a Jack Daniel's single barrel, and you go and get another one, they can have different flavors to them and different characteristics because of the time, age, the level in the warehouse where that barrel sat, how much heat it was exposed to, and everything. So blending. But new age blending, where that's really come in, there's like Bardstown Bourbon is a great example, and I visited Bardstown Bourbon Company. That was in episode 1. They're taking bourbons from different companies and blending them together, different ages, and they're putting out a product. This kind of used to be looked down upon because a lot of bourbon aficionados, they wanted a bourbon or whiskey that was exclusively distilled by that company. And I'm going to tell you, my opinion on it is good bourbon's good bourbon, you know. I don't care too much who distilled the product. It's a great science, distilling, barreling, aging, blending. Good bourbon's good bourbon, and I'll tell you, like Bardstown Bourbon, there's other companies that do blending very well. They're really good. So, all right, the next term is bottled and bond. That's a term that you'll see a lot on your bottles in your liquor stores. What does bottled and bond mean? Basically, it's a term dating back to about 1897. In a law, it was a Bottled and Bond Act that basically refers to whiskey as a product over one distillation season at only one distillery, and it's aged for at least 4 years. And it has to be bottled at exactly 100 proof. All right. So, you know, there's a difference between just 100 proof bourbon and a bottled and bond on technicality. And it's all about the one distillation season. So just the regular 100 proof could come from whiskeys and barrels that were in more than one distillation season. A good example is blending, say, a 6, 8, and a 10-year bourbon to make a 100 proof bottle. That would not be bottled and bond. So bottled and bond would be picking from barrels where the whiskey was distilled in, say, October or November over one season, right? So that's what bottled and bond means. 100 proof, distilled in one season. Cask strength. So this is another term you'll hear. And basically it's whiskey that's bottled without any dilution. And, you know, these distilleries, they'll dilute their bourbon or whiskey with water, high quality water. To get it proofed down. A good example is the 100 proof. Most of the time bourbons that come out of the barrel, they could come out at 125 proof, 130 proof, but they're going to add water to get that proof down to 100, whatever they're trying to sell that product at. The world's most famous and best-selling whiskey, Jack Daniel's, the old black label number 7, is 80 proof today. And so that's exactly what Jack Daniel's does. They blend several hundred barrels, add water to get it down to 80 proof. So that's what that term means, is proof. It's the alcohol content. And then what cask strength means. So cask strength is if you drew the bourbon straight out of the barrel and bottled it exactly how it is. That's cask strength or barrel strength, if you would. And proof, like I said, that's basically the alcohol content times 2. So for example, that 100 proof bourbon is 50% alcohol by volume. And here in the United States, you'll see both values on a bottle. So it'll say 50% alcohol by volume, or ABV, 100 proof. So that's how you'll see it. There's another term called filtration. And you'll see it on a few bottles, or non-chill filtered, the term you'll hear. And a great example of that is one of my favorites, Four Roses Small Batch Select. It's a non-chill filtered product. So what chill filtration is, it's basically a process that involves cooling the whiskey down to sub-freezing temperatures, filtering it out to remove oils and impurities that can cause the bourbon or whiskey to get a little cloudy. The result is a whiskey that stays clear even when it's cold, but sometimes it has a thinner mouthfeel, and it can take away from the flavor too. So non-chill filtered tends to have a better mouthfeel, have the full flavor and everything. So that's the difference between chill filtered and non-chill filtered. All right, clear as mud, right? So these are just some of the basic terms in the bourbon industry. A rye whiskey, what is a rye whiskey or a rye heavy bourbon? And we already talked about it's more peppery, spicy, and a lot of you bourbon drinkers don't like it so much. So basically it's an American whiskey that has almost the same rules as bourbon, with one notable exception. Is instead of having 51% corn, the mash bill will have 51% rye. So it's not a bourbon. Remember, bourbon has to be 51% corn. A rye whiskey is at least 51% rye. All right, so that's the difference between, say, rye whiskey and a bourbon that's rye heavy. Okay, it's all about the mash bill. Bourbon, 51% corn. Whiskey could be anything else, right? Okay. So finishing, kind of like blending that some of these companies do that I really enjoy. Finishing of bourbons is popular now. And basically what finishing means is taking a fully aged bourbon and adding additional flavor by means of putting the bourbon maybe in another charred or oak barrel, or adding staves to the barrel. So a few examples is the infamous Woodford Double Oaked. That's a finishing process. So they take their aged bourbon and put it in a brand new charred white oak, American white oak barrel and finish it. So that is an example of finishing. Another is where they'll take a finished bourbon and put it in, say, an apple brandy cask, or even a wine cask or a Cabernet Sauvignon cask, and finish it for, say, 4 weeks, 6 months, whatever they want to get that flavor to the level the customer is going to enjoy. A great example is, and it's a bourbon that I love that came out this year, and I mentioned it in my episode 1, and I've had a hard time finding it, is Blood Oath, pack number 8 specifically, which was the release this year. And that one is aged in apple brandy cask. They call them Calvados cask, I believe. So that's an example of finishing. Age statements. So you'll hear bourbons and see on bourbon bottles age statements sometimes. Some good examples is if you see an age statement of, say, 8 years on a bourbon. Essentially what that means is that bourbon comes from barrels that are aged, all of them are aged at least 8 years. So some of them could have aged 9 years, some of them 12 years, but the minimum was 8 years. So that's what that age statement is. So, for example, one of my very favorites is Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. That product is a 12-year age statement. So that could have bourbon that's aged for 12 years, 13 years, 14 years. So that's what your age statements are. And another term with aging you could see on a bottle is Kentucky straight bourbon, for example, but it won't have a specific age statement. And you see that a lot with bourbon products. And what that means is, by law, that bourbon has aged for a minimum of 4 years. So that's Kentucky straight bourbon. Okay. Tennessee whiskey is going to be my last term that I'm going to talk about. So basically what Tennessee whiskey is, by law, it follows the same rules as bourbon, so it's at least 51% corn. Plus, it has to be distilled and barreled in the state of Tennessee, my home state, the volunteer state, right? And it has to go through what they call the Lincoln County process. So if you've ever been to Jack Daniel's, definitely get down there. And what they do is they take newly distilled whiskey and push it through, slowly drip it through sugar maple charcoal as a part of a filtration process to remove impurities. So that's basically what Tennessee whiskey is. Follows the same rules as bourbon. It's distilled, aged in Tennessee, and it's filtered through sugar maple charcoal. Great stuff. So we're going to wrap this video up, and again, I'm going to do a real quick review for you on the Weller Special Reserve. And Weller is a wheated bourbon. It says it's the original wheated bourbon. It's a 90 proof product, so it's 45% alcohol by volume. There's not an age statement on here, so you could read into it, look up and everything, and see what you could find on that. And what I'll tell you is it's a tough bourbon to find, like I said earlier, here in Ohio, even a lot of places where you may live at. So I got this great deal on it. I got my hands a few bottles to keep, but I'm going to do some sampling here and give you some recommendations on this product. So, I've had a few pours out of this, and what I'll tell you is on the nose immediately. You get definitely oak right up front. You get some honey, and you get some citrus, and you know, it reminds me of orange, right? So, and some bacon spice. And on the finish, the mouth, the taste, it carries those tastes through. So definitely get the citrus, you definitely get the oak, and you get light honey. It's not overpowering and everything. So, but you know, kind of my verdict on it, you know, I talked about I'm a retired military guy. The bottom line on Weller, I paid $23 plus tax. And on the secondary market, because Weller's hard to find, I've seen it online for over $100 and everything. Weller Special Reserve, and Weller it's made by Buffalo Trace, and they also have other Weller products like Weller Antique 107, Weller 12 year. So those are a little more expensive, and they also are very expensive on the secondary market. So that's why I was excited to get this bottle for $23. Bottom line, $23, it's well worth it. It's a really good sipping bourbon, and I have no regrets buying it. You know, to me, I would get into this product for anything in and around or under $30. It's well worth that, right? But when you start talking about the secondary market prices, this is my opinion, and supply and demand, and what you're willing to buy. I'm not paying over MSRP or even just over $30, right? So there's a lot of other products out there, and I said this is a wheated bourbon. There's a lot of other bourbons that are damn good that you can buy and not be spending no $100, $150. Maker's 46, Maker's 101. My Maker's 101 bottle, I believe I paid $35 for it, and it's really delicious. And to be honest with you, if you force my hand to drink this Weller product or that Maker's 101, I'm going to choose the Maker's 101 every day. But everybody has a different, you know, flavor that they like. You may have somebody that will try this Weller Special Reserve and say, yeah, I'd pay $60, $70 for that product. You know, but that's not me. You know, I'm not going to jump out and dive into that craziness. So, so thank everybody for their time. On the bottom below this video, hit the like button if you enjoyed what we talked about today. Share the video, spread it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. And let's get the word out there and on what bourbon's all about, and the great community that we have. So, and also make comments on the video if you have things you'd like for me to talk about, products you might like me to taste or what have you, or just topics. Please put them in the comments and we'll take a look at them. All right, so we'll check out for episode 2 now. Until next time, the Southern Bourbon Whiskey channel is out. Have a great one.